Welcome to another episode of Behind the Dreamers. I'm Jennifer Loading, and we are talking to the achievers, the creators, the magic makers, and the dreamers. These are our friends, these are your friends, and they are living the extraordinary. Well, here we are, another episode of Behind the Dreamers. Have another amazing guest coming on today. I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about him. So my guest today has had over 40 years of experience in music as an entrepreneur, building a successful business with virtually no advertising and creating a worldwide following, generating over 50,000 personal notes and letters of support for his music. He's done some incredible work. So you guys are going to get to hear from him in just a few minutes. But before we do that, we need to do a shout out to our sponsors. All right, so today's episode is brought to you by Walt Mills Photography. If you are a creator needing post-production, consultation, or promotion, Walt Mills is your guy. Whether short films, YouTube films, photography work, or a new headshot, Walt can help you find a solution to match your needs. To learn more about him and his work, you're going to want to go to photosbywalt.com. We also want to give a shout out to Chris Clow of Upbeat Media Productions. If you are in need of turnkey special event production, Clow is your go-to. To learn more about him and his work, you're going to want to go to upbeatmediapro.com. All right. Well, I am super excited to welcome my guest to the show today. Dave Combs is a songwriter, photographer, entrepreneur, and author with 4 decades of experience at writing over 120 songs and creating 14 albums of soothing, relaxing, instrumental piano music. His music has been played millions of times worldwide on radio, satellite, and all internet streaming media, and it continues to touch the lives of millions of people all over the world. He's also the author of the best-selling book, Touched by Music, How the Story and Music of a Rachel Song Can Change Your Life. So welcome to the show, Dave. So excited to have you here.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm excited to be here, too. I've been looking forward to this since we first set it up.
Well, good. I'm excited because that's how it should be. I want to make sure you have a good time when you're on this show. That's what I always say. That's my goal is to make sure my guests have a great time. All right, so I want to open this up really quick. I want to know, how did you get into piano? How did this start for you?
Well, I suppose it was probably into my genetic makeup. My mother and father both loved to play music. My mother and father both played the piano. My father played by ear. He could not read music really well, but boy, could he play the music. But his mother, my Granny Combs, who was born in 1894, was a wonderful musician. She could read the old, some of your listeners may know about shape notes. Back in the 1800s, for people that didn't know how to read the actual notes, they had different shapes of the notes for people that they would sing. So you all heard the song about do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. You know, the Sound of Music song, do, ba, dear, you know, that song. Well, each of those do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do's is kind of, I guess, the Latin names for the notes on a scale. Well, each note had its own unique shape. One was a square, one was a triangle, one was, each note had its own unique shape. And so you could tell by the shape which note to sing. Well, my Granny Combs, she could read shape notes. She could sing a song. You'd hand her a song written in shape notes. She could sing it. Well, and also her favorite instrument to play, she had 2 actually. One was, and this is before electricity, was an old pump organ. You pumped the air through the organ with your feet. There was some bellows that you pumped with your feet to push the air through the organ. And she could play that old pump organ and make it talk. And another instrument she loved to play was the old country instrument that we call an autoharp, which was made famous by Mother Maybelle Carter, who was Johnny Cash's mother-in-law. So it's an old instrument. It's a stringed instrument, but it's one, if you Google autoharp and Mother Maybelle, you're going to hear some autoharp music. Well, my Granny Combs could make that autoharp talk as well. So I grew up in my early childhood always hearing music played around the house, of course at church. And then when we would go see Granny Combs, she'd hand me her autoharp and say, "Here, David, tune it up for me." And I'd tune it up and hand it to her, and she'd just tear loose singing something. And so I've been around music really all of my life. And so it's not a surprise to me that I ended up after a career in technology and a math and science degree and all that side of my corporate life. But I ended up my career, my dream job was to be working for myself and with Linda and our family in self-employed as entrepreneurs in my music. And that's what happened. So I love the title of your, Behind the Dreamers. Well, I was and was a dreamer, but my dream really came true of being able to make music and then eventually actually make a living making music. So that's kind of the short version of my life journey with my music.
It's so awesome. And I think I shared with you, off camera when we talked that I love to play the piano too. I'm nowhere the skill that you have, but very young, my grandmother had an organ. And so I used to play on that and then I took piano lessons for many years. I have a piano in my house, nothing beautiful, but it's so funny because, I don't get to play very often, but when I just want to have like some, detox time for myself just to like relax, I love to just get on the piano and play. And I'm not even that great at it, but I will tell you another funny thing too. My oldest daughter is very musically inclined and in fact, she took piano lessons for many years, but both my daughters took piano lessons for many years. And it was so funny because my oldest daughter did not want to play the fingers to the notes. She just wanted to play piano. She just wanted to go play, hear the music and just play. Middle child would memorize everything, had it perfect. And so they would go to their recitals, like they'd have their little piano recitals. And I could always tell that my oldest daughter was winging it because she could totally listen to music and just kind of play. And she would know how, when she messed up, to just finesse it and keep going along, right? Like just keep going. Whereas middle child.
That wasn't a mistake. That was a deliberate
Yes.
improvisation.
Yes. And I knew because I heard her practice it a lot. Like I'd hear it, I'd be like, middle child would have her music down, like she would have memorized it. Like it was perfect because she practiced and practiced and practiced, but completely different children with their piano lesson. And it's so funny. My oldest, still to this day, she has her organ piano. She likes to play, but she is loves to hear music and just transfer it to the piano. Isn't that funny?
I'll bet she would probably listen to my Rachel song or some of my other music, and I'll bet you she would sit down at the piano in 5 minutes, be playing along with my recording of that music. She would, I guarantee you.
Yeah, it's funny. We have a lot of music in our family. My uncle was in a band, played guitar, and my daughter learned how to play the ukulele. I have a guitar. So we've all had a lot of that in our family, our lineage too. And so that's why I asked you that question, because I feel like, it's one of those things that I had a guest come on that say our strengths always find us. And it's funny how things that we did when we were younger sort of come back around in our lives, sometimes in these just miraculous little ways. And in your particular situation, it came back to become a career for you. So you got to do something that you really love, bring it back to a career for yourself, and you actually get to enjoy what you're doing. I think that's awesome.
I was 33 and a half years old before I wrote my first song, which was Rachel's song. So I spent 33 and a half years with music. I was a choir director at my home church and another church here in Winston-Salem. I sang in the university choir when I was in college. It's a volunteer kind of thing. I was a math major, physics minor, but I sang in the university choir. And so all this being around music and around creative music for 33 and a half years, I never wrote a song. Not one. Nobody ever told me, Jennifer, that I could write music. Now, this is one of those interesting things is you know how influenceable children are. What if someone had told me when I was 6 or 7 or 8 years old, little Davy Combs, you're going to be a songwriter. You're going to write music. Now, what would that have planted in my mind, and what would have happened from that? Well, that didn't happen, of course, but it was when I was 33 and a half that I wrote my first song. But I've turned that song and the songs that I wrote after it into a thriving business that allowed me at age 45 to quit my well-paying job at AT&T in technology and do nothing but my music full time from that point forward. So, things can change, but it's not always a linear thing, and it doesn't happen when you're young necessarily or when you're just starting out. It may happen midlife, or you may be a grandma Moses and not start painting until you're in your 60s or something. You never know when the creativity is going to blossom, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. And I like that you use the word not linear because that's something that I talk about all the time, the linear versus non-linear. And so many times people think, you and I know this, but a lot of times I think people get into this space, even in entrepreneurship, and they think everything's sort of like, we went to school to do this, so we should do this and this should happen. And it doesn't really work that way. There's nothing in our lives at any point in time that is linear. Nothing. The weather's not even linear. Nothing is linear. And so
No.
when you really get to a place where you embrace that, I think it's actually kind of cool because if you can go back and look at all the pieces that you did, you'll see that there are dots that connect, right? There are pieces, these things that happen in our lives. There's pieces we needed to take away from that, and they really all kind of contribute to the bigger thing at the end, right? But they're just not. It's not a dot to dot to dot to dot to dot. Sometimes it's way over here,
Mhm.
it goes out to the side, goes this direction, comes back. And you just have to be okay with that process.
Yeah, it's a very meandering, and maybe it's guided by a force beyond ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a religious person. I do believe that God guides our lives. He doesn't, I don't think, make every little move that we make is directed by Him. He
Sure.
gives us a kind of some boundaries and a direction to go, and He's given us since the Garden of Eden, He's given us the right to choose good and evil. You know, Well, unfortunately, Adam and Eve made the wrong choice, but and we've all suffered since. But nevertheless, we have a choice of which way we can go. But I do believe that there's a larger uh, divine force that helps to guide us if we will try to stay attuned to it
Sure.
and listen for it and see, look for the signs of whether you're doing the right thing or not. You'll find some feedback,
Mm-hmm.
and it'll be from feedback from your friends or in my case, some of my fans of my music that would write me a letter. They didn't know me, I didn't know them, but they knew my music. They would write me a letter that would speak to my heart right at that moment, the message that I needed to hear. And so there's a lot to pay attention to and to try to stay tuned into.
I would agree with you on that. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a lot of the intuition too. It's just listening to yourself and, being guided. And I think that's a hard thing for a lot of people because they don't trust that process.
Mm-hmm.
They're looking for that scientific proof back there, which I think is so cool about your background because you come from your education is not really in that creative space, but you went into that. And I think it's great because you've got both this right brain, left brain thing kind of going on. I had a guest on my show that was a musician that it was kind of the same thing. And we were talking about how even in music, you have to use both sides of your brain sometimes, right? We think that you're either this way or you're this way, but you're not really. You have to use both. And a lot of times we get so concentrated, I think, on all the having to have data and facts and the proof that we kind of suppress the creative side of our brain, right? And we don't use it. But when we
Mm-hmm.
start using it, wow, cool things start happening in our lives.
Exactly.
So I love it, Dave. Love it, Dave. So tell me about Rachel's song, because this was your first song. What was the inspiration behind this?
Well, my inspiration it was very similar to your situation. I know that you love to sit down at the piano, as I do, to relax. There's
Hmm.
just something about tuning out the rest of the troubles of the day or the world and the noise of what's going on, and just sit at the piano and play something, whether it's sheet music that you're playing or just doodling at the piano. Maybe like one of your daughters that loves to just makes things up. She could just sit there and play. She doesn't have to have music in front of her. She can just make music. Well, that's how I relaxed and have really almost, I guess, all my life. When I would come home from school or work or whatever, I'd sit down at the piano and I get lost in the music. It just takes me to a place that I need to go. Well, at one time in January of 1981, I came home from work, sat down at my piano that evening by myself. Linda had not got home from her job yet, so I'm there by myself. And I sit down at the piano and I start playing this song. Now, sometimes I would play sheet music or turn on the radio and play along with it if I could and whatever. But this time, I just sat at the piano, put my hands on the keys, and I started playing in the key of C. Very simple. I like a C chord, A minor, G, F and G, or a little D minor or something in there. But I started playing in the key of C. Then the first note was the melody note was a C. And I just started playing. And it was this just beautiful, simple melody that I was playing. And it was a chord progression of C, A minor, and then a D minor, and then a F and a G, and so forth. But I wasn't thinking about that. I was just playing. just the music was just flowing through me. I played the verse, and then a chorus came to my, seemed to be appropriate. So I just started playing this chorus, and it starts in, a chord with an F chord, and then it goes to an F minor, and then back to a C, and so forth. And it just flowed. It was a naturally occurring song, like the song had been there a million years, and I was just playing it for the first time on my piano. And I didn't think anything about it. I would continue to play it, and then a couple of days later, my wife Linda comes home from her job, and she says, "Dave, what is the name of this tune that I've had stuck in my head all day long? I've been, how you get an earworm and you just cannot get that tune out of your head. You hum it all day long." And so she hummed a little bit of it, and I said, "Well, it doesn't have a name." And she said, "Well, what do you mean? You play it on the piano all the time." I said, "Well, it's just something I made up." And she looked at me kind of funny and said, "Are you kidding?" And I said, "No, I just made it up." "Wow, that's amazing. Have you written it down?" "No, I've got it up in my mind. I'm not going to forget it." And she says, "No, no, no. Something might happen to you, and I would not remember that beautiful song. So you have got to write it down." I said, "Oh, yes, ma'am. Okay, I will write it down." And so I did. And I have here in my hands, for those that are watching this is a musical score with just the melody notes and then the chords written above it of the song that I was playing. And at the top, it just says copyright David M. Combs, 1981. No name, nothing, just the notes and the chords. So I did write it down, put it back in my piano bench, and I'm happy, she's happy. And I continued to play it, and for time after that, and we tried to think of a name for it. And it was nothing we came up with fit. It always sounded hokey. So 2 years later, it took 2 years later for this to happen. Friends of ours had a baby girl, and her name was Rachel. And they asked me and Linda to be her godparents. So at little Rachel's christening service, Linda and I are sitting there in the church with the family and the minister. It was a private service on a Saturday with just us in this little country church. And up at the front of this little country church, was on the platform, was a baby grand piano, beautiful little baby grand piano. Well, toward the end of the formal part of the service, I punched Linda and I said, "Hey, what do you think about me playing this little tune now as part of this service? It just seems so appropriate. And what do you think?" She said, "That's a great idea." So after the formal part of the service was over, I went up to the minister and the family and said, "I've got this little tune that I would love to play on the piano. Would that be all right with you all?" And they said, of course, they said, "Sure." So everybody sat back down, and I went over to the piano and started playing. And it just had a beautiful sound in this almost empty country church. The echo in there was just beautiful. And so I got most of the way through the song, and I hear in the audience, I hear this clearing their throat and little sniffles here and there. And I noticed that even my eyes were getting a little bit wet. So I finished playing the song, and I looked over at little Rachel in the arms of her mother, and I said, "From now on, this song will be called Rachel's Song in her honor." And that's how it got its name. And it just was the perfect fit for the song. Everybody loved it. And from then on, when I play it, that's been known as Rachel's Song. So that's how it got its name.
I love it. I love it. That's so awesome. It's so fun when you find out how things come about like this. But it's interesting that you were saying about you didn't have the name of it in the beginning, because I feel like that's how book writing is. I had a guest on the other day and we were talking about that. The hardest part, like one of the things he said, when he was writing his book, is that he did it, again, get out of the linear. He did not write it in a straight process going down. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, yeah, that's funny, because when I'm building out a program right now, and I've had to do that. I don't have the title of the program yet. I don't have all the subtitles yet. And I'm having to just write in different places, like a section that I feel comfortable writing, and then come back to a different section. And so I think as creators, we have to do that sometimes. Like, we've got pieces and we're building things out. And then I always feel like those things come when they're supposed to come. Like they show up when they're supposed to show up, right? When we're not trying to force it.
Yep. And so once that happened with that song and it had a name, uh, life was going along as usual. Linda was working at her job, and I was working at my job at AT&T, and my job started taking me and a lot of traveling. I was doing a implementation of manufacturing software in our factories, and we had factories all over the United States. And one of those factories, though, happened to be located in Nashville, Tennessee. Well, I see the smile come on your face. It always brings a smile to my face, too. I love Nashville, Tennessee. It's Music City, USA. I'm a Tennessee native, born in East Tennessee myself, so I just love Nashville. Well, Linda said, well, Dave, while you're in Nashville working during the week, why don't you one evening go out and see if you can find a studio to do a demo recording of Rachel's song? Getting something professionally done that we could keep and give a copy to Rachel and her family, and we could all enjoy this. It'd probably be spectacular. I said, well, that's a great idea. So I took her advice one evening after work, and I'm driving around downtown Nashville about 6 o'clock in the evening, trying to find a studio to ask about getting a demo made. Well, in Nashville, Tennessee, down south, we call it, they rolled up the sidewalks at 5:30. Used to, anyway. They don't do it anymore, but we used to say that they rolled the sidewalks up at 5:30 because everybody businesses closed and they went home. Well, I was having difficulty finding a place that was open. I go down this one street in this area of Nashville called Music Square. It's about a 2 or 3 square block area where everything in it has to do with music. It's got the old original RCA recording studio that tourists can come and tour and see how records were made. It has the Country Music Hall of Fame. It had BMI and ASCAP headquarters and lots of studios. Anything music was inside this big area. And there's one street, a side street in there, that's called Roy Acuff Place. And Roy Acuff was a dearly beloved musician in Nashville, Tennessee for many, many years. And so they named a street after him. And so down at the end of Roy Acuff Place was a building that had a roof that looked like a barn roof. And then on the corner of the street, there was this huge water wheel, like one you'd see on an old mill on the parkway or someplace where they used to grind grain and whatever. And on the side of the building, it said, the Music Mill. Well, I thought, that's clever. And so I pulled in the parking lot. Sure enough, I saw a person sitting at a desk through the door. And so I parked and went in and knocked on the door, and he unlocked it and came. And he says, I'm George Clinton. Can I help you? And I said, well, I sure hope so. I'm looking for a studio to record a demo of a song that I've recorded. Well, he said, well, come on in. And as I stepped into the lobby of this place, on the left, it was like a 2-story lobby, big lobby. On the left wall was this life-size picture of Glenn Campbell. I love Glenn Campbell and his music. He just was a fabulous musician. And then right here in front of me on the big wall was a panorama life-size picture of the group Alabama. Well, I love Alabama and their music. And then there was the Forrester Sisters, and then there were gold records and platinum records all over the walls. And, it was a classy place. And so I must have really looked impressed. And I said, George, I've never been in a studio. And he said, well, you are in luck. Nobody happens to be recording now. It's about 6 o'clock. Normally there's somebody here recording. Let me take you on a tour of the studio. Okay. Well, he said, let's go into Studio A, which is the big studio. We go into the music room where all the musicians set up. You could put an orchestra in that room. I mean, literally, it was a big auditorium-sized room, and in the corner was a 9-foot concert grand piano, and booths around for this isolation booths, and then he said, well, let's go into the control room where all the engineer works. I said, okay. So he opens up this thick door. I guess it was 6 or 8 inches thick, soundproof door. And it opens it up, and we go into this control room. First thing I see when I get in there is this console, the recording console. It must have been 8 feet long, and I've later learned it had about at least 32 tracks that it could record simultaneously. And then around the walls were these digital and analog tape recording machines, the big soundproof picture glass window where the engineer could see out into where the musicians were, and those big monitor speakers on each side so he could hear the sound beautifully. And I was just blown away. I said, George, how much does a place like this cost to rent? He said, well, it's $125 an hour plus engineer. Now, this was 1986. $125 an hour today doesn't sound like a whole lot, but in 1986, it was a lot of money.
Yeah.
And so I said, that's a lot. And he says, well, don't worry about it. The fellow who owns this studio owns another little studio in a house, a little small rent house across the street that they've converted to a studio, and it's $15 an hour plus engineer. I said, I can afford that. I can do that. I said, wonderful. Now, all I need is a musician that can play a little song that I've written on the piano. Who would you recommend? And he thought for a second, and he said, I know just the person. His name is Gary Prim. He said, Gary and I go to church together. I've known Gary forever, and he's a wonderful musician. Everybody in Nashville loves Gary and his piano playing, and he'd do a great job for you. I said, well, wonderful. He said, let me get you his phone number. So let's go back to my desk, and he wrote down his phone number on a piece of paper and gave it to me. So I thanked him profusely, and I immediately got back out and hopped in my rental car to go back to the hotel near the airport to call Gary Prim. Now, some of your younger listeners will say, well, why didn't you call him on your cell phone? Folks, this was 1986.
Right.
Cell phones had not been invented. The internet had not been invented. Google did not exist. None of that. So anyway, I go back to the hotel to call Gary on my landline phone from the hotel room. Call him up, get his answering machine, left a message. In 30 minutes or so, he calls me back. And he said, this is Gary Prim, can I help you? And I told him what I was looking for, and that George Clinton had highly recommended him. And I said, is that something you could do? Yeah, definitely we can do that. And I said, well, what do you need from me? And he said, it's very simple. All I need is two things. I need a little recording of you playing it, the song, so I kind of know what it's supposed to sound like. And then I need a lead sheet. And I said, okay, what's a lead sheet? I did not know what a lead sheet was. I didn't know the lingo of the music business in Nashville. And he says, oh, it's just the melody and the chords written out on a piece of paper. I said, oh, well, I've got that.
You got that.
That's the thing I wrote down when I first wrote the song.
Right.
And so I just didn't know to call it a lead sheet. So I got back home, mailed that to Gary, and 2 weeks later, this was August the 22nd, 1986, 6 o'clock in the evening. I'll never forget it because that day and that time changed my life from that point forward. I met Gary Prim at this little studio. He comes walking in this little studio house, and he's carrying his little synthesizer under his arm. It's a Yamaha DX7 synthesizer. Your musicians may remember what that is. And it's a wonderful, one of the earliest high-quality synthesizers. And so I meet Gary. He comes in, and he sits down at this tiny little baby grand Yamaha piano in this tiny little studio. Now, I later learned that this one baby grand piano that was in that little studio was the very first Yamaha piano shipped from Japan to Nashville, Tennessee. It was the first. So I'd love to know the history of all the people, whether Jerry Lee Lewis or Elvis Presley or whoever might have played on that piano in its day back when it was first shipped here to Nashville, Tennessee. But anyway, that's the piano that Gary played Rachel's song on. So he sits down at the piano and starts playing and doodling around, and pretty soon he tells the engineer, I'm ready. Let's roll. So the engineer's got the tape recorders all fixed up to record, and he pushes the record button and says through the little speaker, we're rolling. Tells Gary, and so Gary starts playing. And now remember, I have never heard my own music played by anybody else in my life. It's just been me playing Rachel's song, period. So I don't know what I was expecting, but I know that I was absolutely blown away by what the music that I heard performed by this professional session piano player in Nashville, Tennessee. And I just could not believe my ears. And so when he finished the piano part, just the piano part, I thought, well, he's done, and that's going to be, and it sounded great by itself. And so he comes back in the control room and he says, he listened to it and he said, that sounds pretty good, but I want to add, I want to enhance it a little bit. I've got some ideas of making it even better. I said, okay. So he said, I want to add some strings. I think piano and strings go together really well. He said, I want to put some high strings in there, and to give it some bottom, I'll put some low strings in too. So the engineer fixes up 2 more tracks on the recorder to record the strings, which he's going to play now on his synthesizer. So he puts his headphones on and listens to the piano part that he just played while he's also playing the string parts on the synthesizer. So he's really playing along with himself there.
Right.
So he records the high strings, got 2 more tracks, puts in the low strings, the bass notes, and so it's really starting to sound really full. And then he did something I had no idea what to expect. He said, I want to double the piano part on an electric piano sound. In other words, I'm going to take the sound, the notes that I played on the
Right.
acoustic piano, and I'm going to play the same notes on the electric piano to give it a rich tone to it. And so he sits down and he nails it. I mean, you'd think, because he's playing all this out of his head anyway,
Right.
but he actually, the notes that he plays on the electric piano were exactly right on top of the acoustic piano. Very, as they say in the music business, it was really tight. And so I could not believe that. And then he said, well, I need to add, probably in the middle here when I changed keys, he did change keys in the middle of the song from the key of C and jumped it up to the key of D flat instantly. When you hear the song, you'll know what I'm talking about. It goes from C and starts the next verse in the key of D flat. He said, right there, I want to kind of build that up with some horn sounds. So he switches his synthesizer to some horn sounds and 2 more tracks and put the headphones on and he records that part of it. Okay, got all that done. Now I think we've used about 6 or 8 tracks so far.
Yeah,
Is all we've used. And so when he finished that, he comes in the control room and said, let's listen to it. So the engineer winds it all back and starts, plays all of it together, so that the piano and electric piano and all the strings and the horns, everything playing. And we're listening to this, and Gary, he's intently listening to what he had just created to make sure everything was just right. He's a perfectionist, and I could not believe my ears. It sounded as good as any song I'd ever heard on the radio, period. I don't care what famous musician you're talking about. And I was just blown away. So Gary said, I love it. I said, man, I really, really love it. And so I wrote him a check for the agreed upon fee, and he took that and his synthesizer and walked out the door. And I thanked him profusely, and I didn't know whether I'd ever see Gary Prim again in my life or not. I had no idea that night would be the first of over 170 times that Gary and I would go into the studio to record a song. I had no idea. But that was the beginning of my dream of having my music performed professionally, and it exceeded my expectations probably 100-fold.
Yeah. Wow, Dave, that's so awesome. So, and obviously, we're talking the 80s. We're now in 2020. A lot has changed here. So what I'm interested to know, because if I say what was the most difficult thing you had to do, I mean, we're talking many years here where there's these transition, but I would love to know, and even maybe for our audience, what do you feel like, with this newer internet and all these things that's going on, maybe what do you feel like has been the biggest thing that's helped you be successful? Like one thing that you feel like you did that made a difference as you've transgressed it through these generations with your work?
Well, I built a foundation early on of a fan base or a listener base through the radio stations. I did get the music played on the FM radio stations all over the entire country. And that's
awesome.
Another long story we won't go into now, but you can read all about it in my book. We'll save it for the
next time.
We'll tease them with that one. It is a fascinating story, but I got it into all 400 and some radio stations all over the whole country.
It's awesome.
Listeners loved the music. They started writing me letters. Back then, they actually wrote physical notes, postcards, and letters to me. And I've gotten over 50,000 of those over the year, and over the years. And they're just super unbelievable letters. People pouring their heart and soul into telling me how my music has touched their lives. Now, you'd think somebody would just write and say, "Well, it's a beautiful song. Thanks for writing. I'd love to hope to see you sometime." Blah blah. Nope. No, they're telling me every detail of where they first heard the song, how it brought them to tears, how they proposed to their husband or wife with my music playing in the background, how a child was born with my music playing. All
That's
of these
awesome.
kind of just wonderful, intimate stories. And so that was the beginning when I knew that I had something it would stand on its own. Whether I was there, I'd already created the product now. The music was
Right.
out into the world. It had a life of its own. And if something happened to me right then, the music still would exist. And so it began to spread around the country and around the world through cassette tapes and CDs back then in the
Yep.
80s. And I found out that I could sell my music through gift shops, not through the record stores and the big box stores. They didn't want to have anything to do with me. And entrepreneurs can identify with that. You know, if you've ever had a product and
Yep.
walked into Sam's Club or a Costco and said, "Here, I want you to carry my product on your shelf over there." Well, you've got an
Yep.
uphill battle ahead of you to
Right.
get your product carried. Well, that's what I ran into with my music. Nobody wanted to carry my music. So I had to invent my own way of selling my music throughout the country. And that was through gift shops who weren't in the music business, but they had a sound system in their shop where they played beautiful
Mm.
music while their customers shopped for their beautiful tourist gift items while they were in the shop. So I always describe those shops as shops that looked good, smelled good, and sounded good. So if you
There you
walk in a
go.
shop and your level of stress just kind of goes whoo down, you're in a good place. Well, that's where my music was played successfully. They would play it, and the people in the gift shops would say, "I love that music you're playing." And they'd have it in a basket right by the cash
Mm.
register. And they said, "Well, here's a CD of it. Let's take it home." And so I sold pallet loads, truckloads of my music throughout the entire country in the 80s and 90s, uh, throughout the times that we were selling physical music through cassette tapes and
Yeah.
CDs.
That's
And so
great.
I'm so grateful that I lived through, and what my business growth was through that cycle of music where we really had something to sell. Now you've hit on something that's really kind of a sore spot with me, is that today I have a hard time finding a person that owns a CD player.
Mm.
I'll
Right.
ask a stranger I'm on a bike ride on the Greenway. I'll say, "Yeah," tell them about my music or whatever. And that's, "Do you own a CD player?" "No, I don't even own one anymore."
Right.
Well, what am I going to sell to a person that has nothing to play the music on? I've got boxes of CDs and here that I could sell to somebody, but there's nobody there to buy them anymore.
Right.
Well, that music model, the business of music model, has drastically changed.
Right.
And so now it's all streaming. People that listen to this probably are listening to this on Spotify or some of these other streaming media.
iTunes. Yep.
And that's the same platform that now plays my music.
It's awesome.
But like if you're on Spotify, you can say, "Play Rachel's Song" by Gary Prim. And sure enough, bingo, there the song will probably start playing. Or you're on Pandora or on iHeartRadio or what's some of the others? The Apple Music,
Amazon.
iTunes.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
SoundCloud. Yeah. There's a lot of them.
yeah, all of
Yeah.
those. Yeah. So all you
Well,
have to do is speak it and it'll play it. But you
right.
know how much money that I make now when my music is streamed? Almost nothing, because I
Mm.
have to have one of my songs played 5 times
Mm.
to earn one
Wow.
penny of royalty.
Yeah.
I do get royalty payments from the streaming platforms, the
Sure.
Pandoras
Right.
and the Spotify,
Right.
all those. But it takes thousands and thousands and thousands of streaming performances to earn even a small amount of money. So that business model has drastically changed over the
Yes.
past 40 years. It's
Yeah.
unbelievable.
But I think it's great that you've been able to navigate. And like you said at the very beginning, set that foundation. I think that it's great that you've weathered through all of this. And I think that's a testimony to your tenacity and persistence to be able to continue, because so many things have evolved. I mean, even just in the last few years, last 10 years, right? So many things have evolved. So I want to ask you, this is great, Dave. And I know we could be here forever. I'm sure you've got so many stories to talk about. And this is always fun about these, is that I know I bring guests on, they always have amazing stories, and yet we don't have time to get them all in. But I do want to ask you one more question that I always love this question. And I think it's a fun question for entrepreneurs. I want to know what you've learned about yourself in this journey of entrepreneurship. Like, what has been the big takeaway for you?
Well, I learned, I think, that my roots and my ancestry and my mother and father's side of the family, they were all farmers. They weren't very rich. They were not big farmers. They weren't rich farmers. They were dirt farmers in East Tennessee or southwestern Virginia, tobacco farmers, but they raised everything they ate. They raised, and they came through the Depression. They never had any issues with hunger or whatever, because they raised all their own food and whatever. But that if you think about the ultimate entrepreneur, somebody who is self-reliant and basically depending on almost nobody else, are the farmers. Mm-hmm. And these old farmers back in the 16, 17, 18, 19, early 1900s, they worked hard. They got up before sunrise, and they went to bed after the sun went down so they could get up before sunrise the next morning and do it all over again, to milk the cows, to feed the chickens, to slop the hogs, all that stuff. Well, that kind of a work ethic and determination to never, ever give up and never, ever blame somebody else for your own circumstances. Right. You need to take responsibility for who you are and what you become yourself. And the fact that my ancestors were that kind of people, I think, is in my bones somehow or other, that I was determined to make the best I could of myself and to evolve myself into the better part of me that I could find, so that after 45 years in the technology, after 45 years, being 45 years old, be able to quit my job in technology and to transition to do nothing but my music full time, self-supporting me and my wife, and at the same time knowing that I'm blessing and inspiring other people's lives by the thousands, if not the millions, was so fulfilling. And that's just kind of who I am. And no matter what comes my way, even today with the uphill battle with all of the streaming, the music model, whatever, I'm not giving up. I've been on over 160 podcasts in the last year.
Good for you.
Interviews like this. I love this. I love talking with folks like you about my story and my music, because I have two audiences. I have the audience of people that love the music and need the music to help reduce the stress in their lives. And I have the other audience that are the folks that are the entrepreneurial folks that want to find out, how can I take my side hustle and make something to be a permanent part of my life?
Right.
And how can I inspire those people to keep at it and never give up? And there's one word that my dear friend Jack Canfield, who wrote the foreword to my book, his favorite principle of success is the word action.
Yep.
You need to take your ideas and your dreams and your concepts or whatever you're trying to do and take some action. Now, every action you take is not going to be perfect. It's not going to work out, but you learn from every one of them, and you learn ways that it won't work, and you learn ways that it will work. But you keep at it and keep taking action. That's the key.
Absolutely. Well, Dave, this has been so awesome. You're awesome. I love what you're doing. I love that you've weathered through all the technology changes, the model of the music, and you're continuing to do what you're passionate about, because I think that's what this is really about, is finding that thing that you love to do and being able to use that and put it to good use. And so congratulations on that front. We're going to have you back on again sometime so we can talk more stories, because I think you got more that I need to hear about. But, we have to end the show sometime, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So thank you for coming on here and being authentic and sharing with our people. And of course, I do want to say to our listeners, if you enjoy our show, please be sure you go to check us out, Facebook, iTunes, hit that subscribe button on the YouTube so we can continue to share these stories. And Dave, I think you're actually going to like my parting thought. I say the same thing every single week because it goes along with your take action. So in order to live the extraordinary, you must start. and every start begins with a decision. So, to you guys, take care, be safe, be kind to one another. We will see you next time.